to The Hinge with Noel and Jake, a spiritual meander on the mystery of being human.
Hello, Noel.
Hello, Jake. Hello, listeners.
Well, in hot pursuit of fame, glory, admiration, and ultimately loneliness, shall we start with something grounded?
There are places inside me for which I have no words. And these are the places I write from. Words are like the thread and the needle and thread to my tornness. Beckett says, words are all we have.
Yeah. So this week is about words, and you sent me this morning the text about Minnesota by the boss, and it's powerful. I mean, and it's words, isn't it?
It's words.
Put the words out there to give voice to those who are not heard, and he has that voice, and he uses it as a service. Beautiful.
Yeah. Words are. I don't know for you, Jake. I know for me, I've long been fascinated by words, and I often think, or I've thought at times, words need to be rescued from whatever association or how, I often think words are imprisoned. Like I often think that we're prisoners. Whereas I think a well-chosen word or, a well-written piece opens something up, liberates us. Like as you were saying, the boss's piece in Minneapolis. It's you might say it's just words, and yet you want to name something. You're trying to name the thing that can't be named.
Yeah. And when you manage to capture the right word for you, it's a connection with self, and when you manage to capture the sentiment or the situation with the right words for those around you, you connect with others, right? And I think with poetry, it's the joy or the gentleness of recognition, recognizing yourself in the poet's journey. We want to see ourselves in a way. Or we want to see a desire for whom we think we might be in a story. I mean, there's many things to say about that.
I think there is this huge desire, isn't there, to, like what you're saying, to know ourselves. I mean, I'm thinking in this moment, I maybe you correct me, is it Plato, Socrates, know thyself? And the obsession maybe we have in the world with knowing who we are, and yet, as you say, you listen to a piece of poetry, maybe you write something, and something in you gets filled in. You something in you gets revealed, and I think words can reveal us. And can also conceal us. I think of, I'm thinking about sometimes, you'll know this about me, Jake, some of my friends, I get so excited sometimes about words. We had a lot of conversations this week about words, didn't we? And we were talking about, even maybe for listeners, why did we land on the word, the title, The Hinge? You know,
Yeah.
what was it about that word? You know, maybe listeners say these two boys are just being pretentious.
Oh, we are. That's why we're also in hot pursuit of fame, glory, and admiration, which we know will just ultimately lead to loneliness. But we might as well give that up and surrender. But it is that that desire to know oneself better, to have an identity. The podcast also requires an identity, and on the back of a packet of fags, as they say, which we didn't have, we had to find a way to find that name. And in the beginning, with great enthusiasm, I jump into the same trap each day, and I think it's somewhere on a shelf or in a story, and I frantically start searching for it. and then my partner in crime comes up with all sorts of wild ideas that he's already thought up, and we had a great name, Open Door. It's an invitation. The light shining through. We had a design, the door ajar, looked great, brilliant. We got the name. Let's get started. Let's start recording. And then something else surfaced in the conversation, which was, it surfaced. We didn't have to push it, pull it, find it, lift all the carpets, throw it through the cupboards, go through the cupboards. It was there, and it turned out that it was the same sentiment, the invitation, the connection, an opening, something moving, but it was something in the door, and it was not the door itself, funnily enough. And so we came to the Hinge as that connection, something that facilitates or suspends something that is alongside something. And if you listen to the etymology, there's many variations as suspended, turning. It brings together very nicely at least the English cultural heritage or etymology and the Dutch and German etymology of hang. It also has hanging, suspending. And in the Middle Dutch also going alongside. So my hometown is called Hengelo, and it's the woods. Low is woods alongside an agricultural field, a hang or eng. So it's a tenuous connection, but you see that this word is in many places, and you very often spoke in our preparations about things as the hinge for connection, poetry especially, because it's one of the things that we like to work with.
I think listening as you shared, I've often, as I said, just been fascinated by words and their meaning, and then we, looking at the Latin word cardo, I think is also, it's the Latin for hinge, cardo, which means heaven and earth. This connection, and I suppose a well-chosen word or sentence that holds everything together. So we felt, it could hold us together.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah, it could be a Hinge part 2. The next iteration. And
the Hinge part 2 with Noel.
Yeah, what happened? What happened to the door?
The door fell off.
But I wonder, because you sit with people a lot, Jake, as well. I wonder, when you sit with people, I'm sure you have those moments where maybe somebody is articulating something and, you hear it inside yourself. You hear, and you offer them a word, and out of that, something changes, something. It's like they hear themselves.
I often do it by way of verification. So can I tell you what I heard, and then you can tell me if I heard it right or it's different. And then sometimes we iterate and say, does it sound like this? Was this the experience? Well, no, it was more like, what? So what you mean is this? Yeah, it's more like that. And then together you find an appropriation or a suitable description that captures this. And sometimes you're completely wrong. And sometimes you say, I never thought about that. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Right? And then it is also the endeavor of offering the recognition. Like, I'm really trying to empathize. I really want you to be seen. It's important for me that you know that you are seen, because we know that we have that deep desire to be seen.
Yeah.
And we can't always hear it from God, or we have to trust that we are completely seen.
That's right.
But then he sends some people our way every now and then to confirm that.
That's true. That's true. I'm thinking about what you're saying about the verification, sitting with somebody last week and, whatever way I heard them say what they were saying, I just offered one simple word back. And, they looked as, in that moment where I think all of us have had that experience where they're going to go, that's the word. And I often think about those moments, and I think for us here at the Hinge, we're interested in words and art and spirituality and contemplation, and how all words are in some way connected to the word. And I think that's often, extraordinary. You read something and I'll certainly feel like it's why that line, words are like stones in my pocket that anchor me to this place. Because when you read something or you come across something and you say, I know the place that they're speaking about. I've been in that town. I know that landscape inside me. Because sometimes, isn't it, the landscape, the places inside us, let's be honest, Of course, some of them are delightful, but some of them are desolate, barren towns. I'd rather not visit.
Yeah.
Like a friend of mine in Cork used to say years ago, he says, yeah. He said, I've been there, bought the t-shirt, wore the t-shirt. Yeah, it's not a t-shirt I like wearing a lot. But I think the importance for us all of being able to articulate what almost can't be articulated.
Yeah.
And so sometimes if we speak too soon, isn't it we can't name the thing, and we're cultivating hopefully this quality of listening, because all great, truly beautiful, truthful words come from the silence beyond the words. It's why we sit, isn't it, before we do this, and
Yeah, and I had a friend asking me, why don't you ask each other more questions? And I thought, well, thank you. Maybe we should ask each other more questions, right? So when you say all words come from the words, maybe I should say, no, can you elucidate us? What is the word?
Yeah. For me, I think of the word as, I notice in my body right now it's the felt sense in the center of my body when I think of the word. And the word for me is God, love.
Yeah.
The divine.
Yeah.
That's much more interesting than any word that I would ever might ever utter. I read one time that we're all a partial spoken word of God.
Yes. Yeah. And the word was God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For you, Jake?
No, absolutely. But I wanted to make it concrete in case some people were wondering if we were prevaricating or beating around the bush, or
yeah.
But to give words to things, to sometimes not quite understood feelings. Like this morning, the sun was out and it lifted my spirit. I had a shower and I decided before we start to record, I'll walk to the local bar for a quick coffee. And I walked up the slight incline, crossing the main, relatively small road, but to a smaller road that is quieter to walk. And a van overtook me, and it was really narrow. So I had to stand to the side. I turned into the street that leads towards the bar, and in the sunshine I could walk in the sunlight. And I look to my right, and I see two plasterers, one with a smear of plaster on his face, already working. Well, it's 8:30, it's not that early, but they're already working, and they're discussing with the owner about some work that they need to do. And the worry comes into me of, if I was a plasterer, I would be worried that my forearms would stop functioning after a while, because it's very heavy, hard work, and you're always working above yourself. And often plasterers cannot do this work until they're 65. But they didn't look worried. And they didn't start being worried from the start. When they chose to be plasterers, they didn't think, oh, this is not going to work forever. They'll deal with that later, right? Perhaps it's not a conscious choice. Whatever it is, it's not important. But it articulated the fear that I have, that I would never be a plasterer for that fear, because of that fear. And I thought, but that's not a good way to go about things, because it says something about how you look at things generally. What will happen if I can't do this for much longer? I have to say, when I go to the hairdressers, I wonder how his hands feel after snipping everybody's hair 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Will he be able to do this without pain when he's 45 or 50 or even older? But, that's not now, that's then. Will I be able to do something? Why do I concern myself with this? But the metaphor in my head is the plasterer, right? So I need to write a story about the plasterer and how he enjoys his work and doesn't think about when he won't be able to enjoy his work. He's enjoying his work now, like I'm enjoying my work now. And then suddenly these deliberations land into our heads with a word that explains it to me, and that's the plasterer.
Now I'm thinking about, as I was listening to you, I was intrigued, about the plasterers and the things that go on, that was going on inside your mind, and mirrored when you go to the hairdressers or the barbers. And I'm thinking about how when we pay attention, like you're paying attention, that the words witness and give witness to something that just engages us. It's not just engages us as says, oh, I'm really fascinated by, engages us at something, at some other wordless level. Like I think of favorite poems, favorite pieces of film, favorite scenes, pieces of music. Being in the National Gallery last week in Dublin in Ireland, just watching, because I often feel like that bit, like the Hinge, the connection you know, and once I'm in that connection, life is very different. There's no need for words.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it back to our conversation of the Hinge. And you talked about words in conversation or in speech, but also the words that come out of the silence. And I've been here in southern Italy now for nearly 3 weeks, and with the idea of experiencing some solitude. And of course, sometimes the solitude is sitting in front of the fire and staring into the flames. But sometimes the solitude is walking in the street and seeing those plasterers in the silence of a short walk. But it was a short silence that suddenly sparked something, right? An image that brought something home. Solitude, silence, experienced in a 3-minute walk.
And I'm, without any pressure, Jake, as I'm listening to your words, you know, I recognize that part of myself that can watch something like out walking early this morning, you know, not really meeting anybody, you know, the people in cars, but there was nobody out walking. And, you know, what comes to us? You know, and so as I listen to you, I'm kind of thinking, without any pressure, I wonder what words will find their way onto the page. And I'm thinking about what an offering that is. You know, like here when we sit here in the Hinge, that we're hoping it's some type of invitation, you know, some type of offering of how do we hold it all together? How are we held all together?
Yeah.
And I often think about the womb-like nature of words. You know, where, you know, you're wanting to articulate something, you know, like maybe the chiseling away or the plasters, you know, or you know, how we create, I think, our desire, isn't it, to create? You know, it's the human desire to create.
Yes.
I think I was saying to you a couple of times this week that there was a sentence that you had used about desire, and I don't know if you can recall that. You know, those words you used, but they've just kept circling around. Yeah, I think you said we're giving ourselves over to desire in the Hinge that we can't fully yet articulate or don't understand fully. And it's just kept going round and round, like the words are weaving their way to places inside me in which I have no words. And so when we sit, part of our joy for us, because it's always lovely to do something together, you know, as much as times I sit on my own in a room with people. Well, I mean, obviously it's different than this. It's like you know, just the back and forth, the listening to one another.
Yes. And we came to the name together, but how we infuse it with further meaning is the story of mutual accompaniment of the two of us, between us, with our listener. So the meaning of the Hinge over time is evolving as we speak.
Gentlemen, what about a short break?
Good idea. Let's have a short break.
Welcome back to The Hinge with Noel and Jake. Please support us by following The Hinge podcast on Patreon, YouTube and Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Yes, welcome back. Noel, would you mind reading the poem one more time that we started with this today?
Yeah. There are places inside me for which I have no words. And these are the places I write from. Words are like stones that I put in my pocket that anchor me to this place. Words are a needle and thread for my woundedness. And listeners, as you might be listening and saying, that's a poem. In truth, it's a poem that I have been rearranging the words for this week. But some of the original words, there are places inside me for which I have no words, and these are the places I write from, were first spoken with actually Jake's wife, Annabelle, and another good friend of ours, Diane. And those words emerged from a place where the three of us sat month to month, once a month, and one person would speak their words and the other two would simply listen. No analysis. No dissecting. And there's something about when you really listen to it that, and you know that on the other side of you that there's a quality of listening that allows you to find these words inside you. I didn't know that evening that these words were going to come from inside me. And I'm thinking actually of, because it was probably another evening where we sat together and, I think I spoke about, coughing and spilling out words all over the floor. And there was something about the listening that helped me to rearrange myself. Because I don't know, for others and for listeners, I have often felt like an incomplete set of words.
And perhaps all of life is that rearrangement of all the words inside us that I feel warbled. And coming back to the question that we had from one of our friends about why don't you ask more questions, it seems that, and that was also my answer to him, that the witnessing is often enough. I can give a direction to the conversation, control it or influence it by asking you the question that I would like to hear, or that I think perhaps on behalf of the listeners ask them a question that they might like to hear. But there is in you also something that you will want to speak. You just don't know it yet. And if given the time to give us that gem, that is far more interesting than me foisting upon you the direction of the conversation, something quite magical can happen, quite sacred. But it requires a certain attentiveness and also a capacity to not speak. And often that's been very difficult for me as an extrovert who likes to talk. I love talking. But I've also seen that it was a limitation in my life because I hardly heard anything interesting, because I was just shouting things that were not very interesting either, but it just took the space up for something interesting to emerge. And well, guys, Noel is laughing here, but it's not funny. Because there's a great sense of embarrassment about that, when you come to realize, like, oh, I've been talking more than listening, and I've missed things. And then there were sometimes very brave and courageous and compassionate people who said, so can I ask you something, Jake? After meeting, what did you hear? And I'd be like, what do you mean? I didn't even understand the question. What did I hear? I heard myself say some brilliant things. And otherwise, there was no one talking. Because they had nothing they had nothing to say. Well, I'm making this up now, but it was a little bit like, did you give them the space? And so this podcast has also emerged from a desire to offer that experience of listening. And so when we talk about the crystallization of an unarticulated desire, that is an ever-emerging thing. Because when I've named my desire, that is now, because I'm a human being and I'm ever curious, there will be a new desire that I can't quite grasp. And silence is important for that. And sometimes I can accompany myself. But as a social phenomenon, a human being, the witness is an accompaniment. And it will just makes it somehow more possible when you're saying it to a representative of the word, one of the words that represents or is part of the great word. You are confiding in that person in a safe space. And in silence held well is a very safe space and a very beautiful space. And, where two or more gather in my name, something sacred happens. Something quite unbelievable happens. And that's the space that we try to create in 3, with Noel, the listener, and myself.
Well, appreciate you sharing that, Jake. And for the listeners, maybe as I listen to myself, I say, you wanting to defend yourself here. And, when I was laughing, Jake, when you were sharing, and my laughter was at the recognition you were speaking that part of me.
Of course, I didn't feel offended, but and of course it is that, and I have to smile too, because it is it is awfully embarrassing, and you feel so stupid. You're an adult in his mid-30s, and you don't know how to listen. Wow, and that's just the path that I had to go through, and it was really beautiful. How this person offered this to me. I had the same with feedback. I gave somebody gave me a piece of feedback, and I started to explain to him why I didn't need that was not the case, and he said, "You don't have to tell me what it is." He said, "I was just offering you a gift. It's called feedback. Maybe it's useful to you." And I thought, "Wow, feedback. That's real feedback." He wasn't criticizing me. He wasn't telling me what was wrong with me. He was saying something about that he had observed in me, and say, maybe you want to do something with that. And it was actually, I think I must have been in my early 40s that I thought, wow, that's feedback. I didn't know what it was. I used the word, but I had no idea what it meant. And you start to separate between, like, am I receiving feedback here, or am I just being criticized? Because it makes it a lot easier to put it to the side when it's criticism. It's not my ego. When you're trampling on me and it's clearly not true what you're saying, you're criticizing me because you want to undermine me. Now, when I know that it becomes much less painful, because there's just the other person trying to be unpleasant with me. But when it's feedback and it touches me, it's very beautiful if I can also say, wow, this person tried to help me to grow and to develop. It's incredible.
Yeah. I'm thinking of that generosity. Where our listening becomes generous, and where words themselves become generous, as opposed to weapons. And I often think, I remember hearing one time, I hear myself as I hear that phrase, I often think, and as I hear it, I say, God, listen to myself, he uses that phrase a lot. And I guess maybe a better way of saying it is, I often reflect, as I often listen inside myself. And I was listening one time to Ruth Fitzmaurice. Ruth Fitzmaurice was married to a man called Simon Fitzmaurice. Both of them have two beautiful books. One, Ruth's, I think, is I Found My Tribe, and Simon's is It's Not Yet Dark. And Simon had motor neurons disease towards the end of his life. And Ruth was asked about him communicating. And I think Simon, if I understand, if my memory serves me correct, he communicated through the blinking of his eyelids. And she was asked one time, about this, and she said, Simon doesn't have the energy to use 10 words where one will suffice. And I felt in that moment my own appropriate shame at the amount of words that I've used and wasted in my life. And I think in this moment of how many words I'll have left. And I hope that when I speak, or the more that I speak, that, as you say, Jake, it comes from this place of a generous listening, that whatever word comes up from inside me isn't, oh, I know that, I'll tell you how clever I am. You think about meetings that we've all been at, where there's a lot of words going around, and I don't know, in the corporate world, Jake, because you've spent more time in that world than I did. I a little bit on the fringes of it at times, when I thought that was where my words might best find a home. And I think for us, I believe for us, it was the listening with one another became, the hinge became, that was, the womb for these words. We say, what you want to, and it was kind of like, it was like a desire that came together. And simply, we've been at meetings, and there's been like, I'm so weighed down by the words. I don't even know. I don't even know what this was about.
Yeah. and it's maybe not even that the words are spoken, but that nobody's listening anyway. So this just feels a bit like, nobody's really listening. Everybody's just waiting to speak.
Yeah.
So when is it my turn, so I can show my brilliance? Let me say something wise here. How can I get out of this one? Right. And our relationship started with a 2-hour listening session.
That's right.
Right. And I can remember meeting my spiritual director, Hank, and I used to go there. I would just talk for 90 minutes. And I would say to him, feeling guilty, because I thought I'd actually come to hear something beautiful by him, and this is wise man in his late 70s, early 80s. I knew him for a good 8 years. I said, I'm sorry, I talk so much, and he said, it is you who needs to talk now. And with those few words made everything okay. And he would look at me lovingly and attentively, and he would not let one single drop be spilled. He wouldn't let any of those words fall to the ground. He caught all of them. All of them. I think in the first year that we met, I think he asked me fewer than 3 questions. Meeting, maybe 20 times that first year. Later, more often, but fewer than 3 questions. I'm, of course, ignoring the ones like, come in, how are you, would you like a cup of tea? But within that conversation, he would just confirm his presence by his gaze, sometimes a gentle nod, relaxing of the shoulders. He was incredible. I mean, it was a masterclass in something. I don't know. I dream one day of being able to show up like that, and I learned more than in any course on listening, I think, or in any reading on listening, from just seeing this man offer his service, do his work. I don't know what to say, but offer his service, you know. And when we first met, that was all that was required. Paying attention and gentle encouragement.
And that's so true, isn't it, in our meeting? And when we meet during the week and we talk, sometimes it's practical things, sometimes it's, preparing for the, not just showing up, there's a listening inside to each other's words. And even right now in this moment, there was a phrase that came in, a part of the phrase as I was listening to you was that you heard me and set a part of me free. And I don't say this to rescue you, Jake, but, you talk about, it's you that needs to speak now. I really heard the generosity of that and of, Hank's words. And I was thinking about your generosity of listening when because I was using a lot of words, And
it was a period of extremely beautiful words, because the way you were speaking, in sort of a stream of consciousness, rhythmic poetry, was like an otherworldly experience. So it was not only a privilege to listen, but it was also an amazing experience to witness it. It was you were partly out of yourself, maybe as you were birthing into becoming anew. But it was really a flow of poetry as a hinge to a new reality. It's quite extraordinary. Yeah. It was. Yeah.
And I would say for listeners, as we're sharing this morning about, the circling around the hinge and what the hinge might be for you, part of the hinge of our friendship, of our brotherhood, of our fraternity was, because I was something, as you say, Jake, was being born. I had no words for it. All I knew was, I could really do with somebody listening here, and those hinges, the strength of those hinges. Like I think of, sitting with people at times, where in our listening, I hope that the listening at times becomes so generous, like Hank's, like yours. I hope sometimes like mine at times, where it allows somebody to unfurl themselves into that place that may not feel like it has no words, but in the strength of the listening, it becomes a hinge to really hear at a level of depth what wants to be spoken. And I'm not just talking about people, sometimes we might think, particularly in therapy, I think in therapy, which I really, at its best, I believe, is about listening and just simply being with people and liberating, through our listening. That isn't only about the traumas. It's about this extraordinary beauty that lives inside people. And say, I was sitting with somebody lately and they were sharing, they shared something. And sometimes all you're doing is, I've said to them sometimes, I'm going to rob that for a poem. No, I says I won't, because I said we're going to be confidential and I won't. It is so you know when you hear something that's beyond the cerebral.
Yeah.
That's much more like the Christ like conversation.
Yes.
But that's not so, not so pious that it can't be playful.
For sure.
Because he was definitely playful when you and me began to hang around together.
For sure. And it was a very unexpected encounter for us. So I never expected a phone call from a man called Noel. I knew of Noel and we'd met once. But somehow you found your way to me.
And I actually, in my memory, as I'm remembering it now of that encounter, was that something said to me, there was some word inside me said, ring you, Jake. Ring Jake. You share whatever words are going on with him. But it's curious. Sorry, yeah?
Yeah, and then we didn't speak for a couple of years or 18 months.
About 18 months. And curiously, the not speaking for 18 months, I mean, if listeners are curious, it wasn't that there was clearly something, not clearly something, but it wasn't that I had forgotten about the conversations or that. I was at that time in my life listening back. There are places inside me for which I have no words. And so the silence wasn't an isolation, we've never really spoken about this until now, this part of it. It was like, I was just listening inside myself. But the hinge, the absolute first part of that hinge, was the sitting with you. And then after 18 months, we just started doing it. I think we were doing it every week, more or less. Then, wasn't it? It was like...
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, now certainly, now that we have the responsibility of producing something coherent, we speak more than once a week with great joy.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes also like this week, isn't it? It's joyful, it's playful, challenging. It's there's movement. And we're often wanting to try and listen to each other's words. Generosity.
Generosity of heart and ear.
And we are that generosity, I suppose. I believe that, Jake and listeners, that I am the generosity. I am a spoken word of the word. I am that generosity. I think sometimes for me in my life is all I know is that I didn't always feel like that. I didn't always feel like I was such a generosity of the word. And I think that can leave you in a kind of fairly wordless place at times. And yet as you listen and as you're listened to, and you've got the hinge of that listening, you kind of go, yeah, that's only an idea. That's a story. It's not true. And that's what I love about sitting with people and listening, I don't know for you, Jake, is because they are so beautiful.
Yeah.
Not even in our brokenness. Yeah, there's some great words come true in art, isn't it? But again, not that we need to be broken to create. Not all art needs to come from the tortured soul.
A lot of it seems to be coming from the tortured soul, though.
Yeah.
And when Solomon could ask whatever he wanted from God, he asked, "Give me the ear of the heart," right? Give me a listening heart. I mean, in many translations, but give me a listening heart. I mean, it's about compassionate listening. He asked for wisdom. And I think, all of us are practicing that. We want to get better at that. We want to be more loving and be more loved, and we know that they walk hand in hand, and we make make big mistakes, but we'll leave it there.
And it's teed us up lovely, Jake, I believe, for our next episode on listening, because I'd love to hear more from you about Give Me the Ear of the Heart.
Good idea. That's what we'll do next week.
See you next week, listeners.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to The Hinge, a podcast presented by Noel O'Driscoll and Jake Essman, produced by Jer Kellett. Feel free to contact the show in the comments or by emailing us at thehingepodcast@gmail.com. Join us next week for another episode of The Hinge.